We have a long reflection on the trauma that's around at the moment, some of it faced by people who have campaigned against things like the battery storage plants that are abounding around rural Scotland. Sleepless nights, disappointment, disillusionment. That may not seem like a big deal in the face of all the other trauma going around. The terrorist attack on Jews in Australia, the enduring, horrible genocide being experienced in Gaza, and the suggestion by President Netanyahu that you can't speak about one without getting on the wrong side of the other. So we discuss all of that. Donald Trump's allegation that, putting it bluntly, Europe is crap, and perhaps the difficulty in managing to get a common position on giving funds to Ukraine would bear that out. We talk as well about the question time furor over that question about fluency that turned second languages amongst young people. It turned into a question about fluency, which it clearly ain't, and much else besides. Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddick podcast. Leslie, you're just back from Tainaght, and understand you've been off swimming in the Firth of Tay recently, so not something I'd have energy to do, I have to say. I'm completely wabbit with this weird lurgy, which kind of doesn't feel like it's doing a lot when it's doing it, other than that you're completely stuffed up, and you could probably hear that even more than normal in my voice, but just totally knackered all the time. I kind of dropped the kids off at school yesterday, and then came home and slept for 4 hours by accident, woke up, went to a 2-hour long nativity school extravaganza with 2 different choirs of people singing in French and I'm going to say oboes, wasn't oboes, various different instrumental recitals, including a chanter.
Fraser, you don't need to persuade us. You were awake. The kids aren't listening to this, right?
I saw it.
You did of your own.
I promise.
You told me of your own free will. You didn't fall asleep. So admirable. And then you came home and
then I went home and had another 3/4 of an hour of accidental snoozing. So I feel that I basically have absolutely no idea what's going on in the world at large this week, because I've mostly been sleeping through it.
Yeah. Well, this gives you a run-in at becoming an old lady, man. You find these things creep up on you a lot. I've still got the kind of constant clearing throat from the last thing. But I was off in Tainaght with the wind farm film, and it was a tremendous gig. I mean, it's the village hall there. They've got about 100 people. I mean, Tainaght, wider Tainaght, greater Tainaght, which is on the way to Oban for folk who cannot place it. It's on the side of Loch Etive. I always get my Oz and Etives mixed up, but I'm pretty sure it's Loch Etive. It's just beside. Totally striking scenery and everything. But anyway, the population is only 1,000. So, that's quite a good whack rate, really, that they got in the hall. The reason being that, like 80 other places in Scotland, they had proposals for a BESS plant. And if this means nothing to you, you probably don't live in rural Scotland. Although actually, these battery storage facilities, storage plants, are cropping up wherever there's a lot of wind farms, partly because of the aforementioned many times problem of there not being enough grid to take the energy. So for the meantime, and maybe just as a way of operating actually, the battery plants soak it up and store it there for subsequent use. Now, the thing is about the battery plants, and this is what all those people had been campaigning about, is they are kind of scary. I mean, you just go into, Mr. or Ms. Google and type in, can fire at a battery storage plant go out of control easily? And the answer is yes, because, and for there'll be people who are more technical, but the answer is quite technical. There's the problems of thermal runaway, which is basically a self-sustaining chain action within the battery cells that produces its own heat and oxygen, and means that traditional suppression agents don't work. There's the chances of a deep-seated fire within fire-resistant enclosures. There's the possibility of flammable gases like hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen fluoride being released. There's electrical hazards, especially if the first responders use water. There's a reignition risk. Even if it seems to be out, the heat can cause the fire to reignite. It's all in the film, because everywhere we went in the Highlands, people mentioned this. And at the beginning, we didn't really rate this because I hadn't got my brain around it really. But by the third or fourth set of people that were kind of really papping it about BESS plants, especially because this seems that very few of the wind farm proposals have actually got any kind of proposals or systems in place for how they would extinguish such fires, and utterly especially because it seems many of them are being proposed for peatland areas. So, the idea of if you kind of set peat on fire, that is, well scary. In Tainault, they're beside the A85. It just goes through a narrow conduit through all the aforementioned lochs. And the proposed plant is about 100 yards from the main road. So that's kind of a bit of a big thing. And nothing that anybody was able to produce by way of evidence like this, or mitigating it, like putting it slightly somewhere different that would be less problematic for people, or away from the A85 a bit, or any of that stuff, it all went talk to the hand. And the thing that is devastating the people who tried is that they thought this was real. They thought local consultation was real. And actually, I'm now at the stage of looking at this in various different parts of Scotland. It's not real because a top decision's been made, first Westminster, then Holyrood. They have essentially said, we're doing this level of new wind farms, particularly. We need to have these BESS plants. And so far, 80 are proposed. 77, apparently, from a Freedom of Information request, have no fire coping with mechanisms. And for the guys in Tainault, they have no fire engine there. And apparently, I could stand to be corrected, there's currently nothing in Oban. So the people who tried to campaign against that, I mean, most of them are yesers. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't ask everybody their outlook, but I think it tends to be the case that well, it's me, right? And I've been very connected with independents. So the people that turn up to stuff, generally speaking, are mostly yesers. And they are so let down because they really believed this was a real consultation and not just a makey-uppy, keeping the natives happy, just talk yourselves into a standstill. These gals particularly have researched this thing like a freaking PhD, and they're not different from that, again, women up the road in the Highlands who've got all the paperwork in the back of their cars in case they ever need it. And none of it's making any difference, which is, let's just stop pretending there is local democracy. Because there isn't. Not on this stuff, there isn't. But anyway, apart from just the seriousness of that realization, it was a very jolly night. And thanks to them all for really a great event. I stayed overnight, had a great dinner, good crack with everybody. But it really, there was another couple of people at the end of that are going to move away, probably from Scotland. I've just been swimming, as you mentioned, in the old cold water, utterly freaking cold water pond with my pal from whose man has just was laid off at Mossmoran. They're going to be leaving. She's got an Irish passport. I may just be a misery magnet. You cannot write that off as a possible. But the number of people I seem to be pumping into who, once they have something that just ends their wee belief in where they are and what's possible and so on, if they've got the means to get out, it just feels like a lot of people are deciding to go, which is totally depressing. And just to get them all out of the way, having also been up in Sutherland recently and talking to people who are not Scots and have been incomers to areas, they're kind of despairing at the fact they're ready to kind of charge the barricades and they look behind them and the locals aren't. And I've spent hours trying to go through the sort of psychology of what happens when you keep getting whacked. Not just even you, but generations of getting whacked, essentially, by either, feudal landowners. We only abolished feudalism in 2001. So either that or remote councils or remote authorities, it builds up a general expectation that whatever you do in life, you will just waste an awful lot of time and get absolutely nowhere. And the locals are at that, for starters, while folk coming in from other countries where things, generally speaking, work, come in with a surely they'll see, and they spend a year to get to the point that the locals were at the beginning.
Yeah, we just have to do the scientific study to prove that actually if you ignite that peat, it could be 6 years before it goes out, or it might not go out at all, like some of these American underground coal fires have been going since the 1960s. It's a huge reservoir of fuel, basically, that could just go and go and go. So I always thought, when you meet people like that, it's a bit like getting sort of punched in the face by somebody that you could punch back, but you're not allowed to, or having a fight in somebody in a shop, but you've got to be the kind of shop owner and you've got to be polite and let them go. It's actually sort of personally very vexing, and you just can't get over it. And actually, almost in some cases, they needed kind of counselling on how to let go of this hurt, as much as they needed help to kind of complete their campaign or to take it further, because you are just kind of dealing with this labyrinth or this kind of solid face, whether it's the local council or whether it's the Scottish government, that can often be just completely impenetrable, and doesn't matter how right you are. If it's been decided that it's going ahead, it's happening whether you like it or not.
Exactly. And that's a really important point, because that's what I'm left with are the things people have told me, some of which I can't tell anyone else for all sorts of reasons. They're trying to sell their house. One woman felt she got cancer. Her marriage fell to pieces as a result of a big campaign she ran. Then she got evicted. And I can't tell all of that story properly because her mum didn't know she had cancer. So, the thing is, it was almost at points I thought in Tainal, and actually it would have to be said in some of the other events, it is like group therapy, because everybody is so freaking traumatized by this. And I know people will say, well, come on to talk about Ukraine, Gaza. You always make those comparisons. And of course, really serious illness has the aforementioned cancer. And this is not those things. So it feels like you should just be able to pucker up, pull yourself together and get on with it. But actually, people are just like the war wounded. They're not sleeping. It's just extraordinary all over the place how much this is happening. And if you're listening and this is the same for you, feel free to get in touch. Though I have to emphasize, the first question after the film was, will you lead a campaign to stop this? And I said, well, no, actually. Because, for one thing, I don't live here. Secondly, there's one of me. And thirdly, the thing that would make any kind of dent in the relentless march of this stuff, which is probably nothing, to be frank, is all of you rural guys getting together. That's in a year of an election. Come on.
Yeah.
But people look at you and just think, I just haven't got the wherewithal for that. And that brings you back to, I did say to some of the more go-ahead incomers, I said, well, now you know what it's like to be Scottish, right?
You're officially Scots now.
Yeah, because you look at it, scale it up in your brain, think, I've already put a year into this. I just can't actually put this out. I can't do this again. So anyway, I hope the Tainal chaps, because we did turn it more positive by saying, well, okay, you've got a head of steam up now, which is often what happens when there's a proposal that's fought. Whether you win it or lose it, the head of steam's still there. You could use this to try to get a development trust together and set up your own local energy company. There are grants still for this kind of thing. I know it feels like, yes, you now have to get back on the pony again, but there's help for it. So I hope that people have got a little bit of energy left to try and do something like that. And yet, it's drastic, really.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the Alba Party are most closely politically aligned in terms of their current campaign against new onshore wind, but still perhaps not making any of the kind of cut through and no real showing in the polls, despite Reform, who don't really have much of a policy on anything, charging away.
Well, actually, the guys that are clearing up are the Tories. I mean, because that, for example, that freedom of information that I mentioned, which found out that 77 of the 80 best plants haven't got a kind of, a kind of system to cope with the fire. That was a Tory freedom of information request. And I mean, up the road, it definitely is all in Inverness, Highlands. It definitely is the Tories that are, pushing it all out and getting an awful lot of applause from yesers, because nobody else will say, who is this for? I mean, it's a ludicrous moment, which again I had to reflect in the wind farm film, which is, these are the guys that privatised the freaking energy industry, the Conservatives, and led to a situation where we have a private company called SSEN deciding on the strategy for the whole of the UK. And of course, energy not being devolved. right? So all of that, thank you very much, from the Tories, and abolish truly local councils, so you might have a little bit more purchase on your own neck of the woods rather than the vast regional councils that we have now. But nobody's remembering that. People are just looking at it at this moment, and the Tories are doing a pretty good, let's just whack this problem here. There's far too many wind farms. There's plenty enough already. And when you say to them, aye, and it looks like all the hardware is just designed to take an awful lot of green energy to the south of England because they can't be arsed having any turbines in the landscape because it kind of offends them. Is that okay? Ooh, don't get much of an answer on that one, Anyway, it's just a sore fact.
Oh, dear. You pointed to Andy McKeever's piece in the Herald this week about Lord Offord. I think the really interesting thing on that, he says that, that Offord had basically contracted him to do some work editing various kind of policy essays that he'd been putting together with teachers and doctors and what have you, all looking at different aspects of problems in Scotland. And he says, most tellingly, every view expressed to me was centred on Scotland's superiority. Offord is desperate to make Scotland better than England. That was the real giveaway. Tories never do that. Tories are emotionally unable to strive for leadership for Scotland over England because they see it as antipathetic to their unionism, which I think is absolutely true. I don't think we're necessarily going to see that from Reform or a Reform Scotland or whatever the heck that's supposed to come to. But I think that is a big problem for both Anas Sarwar and Russell Finlay, is that, nothing that they can look to do in policy terms will ever look to maximise devolution in any way that actually jeopardises the union or takes us in a kind of strikingly different path to what's happening elsewhere.
Well, indeed. I mean, I did watch Question Time for because it was a Scottish panel.
Yeah.
And actually, at one point, I'm sure they canvass a lot of people and then just don't reply to the people they don't want in the end. So I was one of the canvassees at one point. But anyway, Malcolm Offord was on that. I don't know if you saw it, but I mean, he did, Baron, Lord, whatever he is, Offord, Baron, something. He fairly got a lot of pelters, and everybody tried to have a big, go at him when they got a word in edgeways, because the whole dynamic basically that they'd set up was the Tories, Russell Finlay, sitting beside Malcolm Offord. And you can always tell where the main dynamic's going to be on Question Time, because they get the two folk who hate each other and sit them side by side.
I mean, way back, she said, it's okay for you. You can look at him if you want.
Yes. I know, because that's what they just want. And they gave, I mean, it may not sound long, but in a thing that only lasts about 55 minutes, 5 minutes was given to these guys to sort of, basically shilly-shally not look at each other and sort of, do
you're
their...
You're a bigger meanie than you.
Yeah, exactly. And, just by the by, for anybody, and possibly even listeners to this podcast, you guys are kind of like sharper than the average bear in terms of relatively obscure. If you did an opinion poll and asked people of their opinion of Malcolm Offord and Russell Finlay, the vast majority would be Hovnia Scooby.
Yeah, who he...
Never heard of them. So this is the BBC giving to the two least known people there, although I'll grant you probably it's the case that the commentator, God, his name's just jumped out of my head. This is crazy because she's great. Anyway, she might be less known. But still, the point is, these two guys got a very big innings because that's the dynamic they were looking for. And you've got a problem when you're the independence voice in that, because you have to either muscle your way in, which Stephen Flynn sort of half did, half didn't. The thing is, if you do muscle in, you look like you're muscling in, and it looks crap.
Kind of uppity, jumpy in.
Aye.
And I'm going to now talk about something that's totally unrelated to the question.
Yes.
I need my 30 seconds.
Exactly. So actually, Stephen did a very good thing actually on migration, a very passionate thing about, we're talking about friends, neighbours, sons. It was a good statement. But he'd tried to have a go at reform by talking about the guy in Wales that's been had up for taking bungs from Russia. And it was quite a sort of impressive tirade, actually, that he managed to launch, staring at Malcolm Offord, who just basically looked in the other direction and changed the subject. And this guy, I mean, this guy is bulletproof. You know, if Reform do make him, as they're surely bound to do, their Scottish leader, he is going to be quite hard to flip, because even chucking, you're in the House of Lords, you're a bit of a toff. He was born in Greenock in a kind of fairly normal household and so on. So he's quite hard to flip, and as you say, he's a different kind of personality. But the question time Stushy wasn't that in the end. I mean, I was still furious about this and hadn't really noticed. It's sort of subliminally there, this weird thing they did about the question that supposedly a member of the audience asked. And I don't know how these questions are obtained, but there was a statistic, it's now not right in front of me, but it was basically about a third of kids in Glasgow don't have English as a second language. And somehow that got turned into don't speak fluent English.
Yeah. So they have English as a second language, it means they can speak English and in addition to another language which they speak.
Yeah, it means they're pretty blooming smart. And as many people kind of weighed in, including Angus Robertson, saying, well, actually English is my second language because my mother, German was my first language. And in fact, somebody from the audience also said, well, actually, she looked to me kind of Nigerian or African. She was kind of saying, well, English was my second language, but I think I communicated in it reasonably well. But all the time, this kind of weird dissonance in the question was sitting there, because it wasn't clear, and it kept repeating this problem about fluency, which actually wasn't in the statistics. And I also really don't know, this sounds terrible, but you got a whole load of the woman that was asking the question. I just don't quite know that was the sort of question she would have picked up in precisely that way with that statistic. And I know, having had to make programs before, you get questions that are all over the place, and you could be sitting there for 10 years waiting for somebody to get to the bottom of their question. So you have to kind of doof it up a wee bit. But all of that felt very loaded, that it was if so much was about immigration. And whilst Malcolm Offord can point to, the opinion polls that say it's the number 3 issue, it's the number 3 issue. So even if we just don't get into all of this, what about 1? What about 2? I don't know, 4 and 5 together might get a bit of an innings, but no, it's always going to be that, because they're playing to the man and woman in Surrey.
Yes, and it might be the number 3 issue, but it's the number 3 issue because it's the number 1 issue on the telly, and it's the number 1 issue in all the papers. So,
But let's even give them that it's number 3. It's still just number 3, I mean, come on, everybody. What I think anyway,
pointing out, of course, that Glasgow's got a constantly expanding Gaelic medium education, which also counts in the stats as a second language. So it was kind of pick your second language, pal. And these things are a virtue. And of course, the Scottish government has the 1+2 policy, looking to expand the speaking of additional languages. And most primary school kids get the type of French that I got in first year, they get in primary school. So we will be seeing a much better wave of language grasp, hopefully coming through the ranks. But it's all kind of set up and to push these divides. Did you think the sort of ticker tape caption issue from the BBC was the kind of main takeaway for that? Obviously, there's been a lot of stushy about that in the last couple of days. Angus Robertson's made a comment about it. The BBC have been very slow to apologise, and everybody is zeroed in on the way that this was actually still on screen as the kind of banner with the wrong phrasing or the wrong pickup on what it actually meant in terms of the English as an additional language.
Yeah. Sorry, Fraser. We seem to be repeating what we've just said there.
But to me, I thought there was a much more kind of deeper aspect to this than simply just the BBC having the ticker tape up for too long. But that seemed to be the issue that had been sort of zeroed in at.
Well, I guess, and sorry, it's Angela Haggerty, brain finally kicked in. But I think it's, there's, and actually she got into some of the deeper stuff about this conception, which, let's just get into kind of, it was actually the next question was also a very hostile one, suggesting that there's no point abolishing the 2-child cap because the parents will basically just use the extra money to get their nails done. And I mean, in a way, I'm pretty glad I wasn't there, because I think I would have just gone fucking ballistic, because you hardly know where to start. I mean, okay, there will be there's some people that do, stuff, if you like, pretty inadequate stuff with all forms of support or income. Quite a lot of people on the upper kind of income lines. I'm sure if Barron, was trailing himself around the House of Lords, he'd find quite a lot of inappropriate use of money there as well. But it's just, what is the bulk of people's experience? And where are we getting with all this, suspicion and kind of, because the point is we live in ghettos. So it's very probable that people don't know anybody. If you're not on universal credit, it's very probable you don't know anyone who is. And thus you're very disproportionately affected by an anecdote here, an anecdote there. It's a bit like the NHS. So you get these lots of little sneering anecdotes. It's right back to the deserving and undeserving poor, except, now nobody's able to reality proof these kind of sneering kind of asides, because they can't, we're not all living in one world.
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty with it. I'll quite give you that for that reason too. If you're coming on to Angela Constance and the grooming gangs at some point, I know, for example, because I was asked by a charity to get involved with young girls in Dundee who wanted to make a film about the rape culture there. And this was a really difficult one to do, because it was the same problem again. The boys that they're accusing of this, and young men, are still living there. And so if, it's all very well for, you had to go through with people, look, if we were making this film, and obviously if you make it, you want to get it out there, this is then what you have to figure out you're going to live with. And I wasn't trying to be doom merchanting, but on the other hand, it's kind of quite serious. And I don't know if they felt there was enough support. That's why they felt they had to make a film in the first place.
Yeah,
so
be heard.
This is like, life in any of the estates where life is pretty tough and generationally tough is obviously not a walk in the park. And, middle class people like me sitting in a nice house that I own have probably just not got an idea of what is going on in other parts of society. And yet, for damn sure, the solution is the penny pinching, the grudging people, the watching, the taking one example of someone, expanding it across a whole group of people. You don't know why somebody's decided they need their freaking nails done. I don't understand it myself. I don't. But, this is not the answer. It's not the big issue. It's not the question that is the one that deserves our attention. And questions spent another 10 minutes on this judgmenty crap.
Well, it's that kind of benefit street sort of stuff. Why have you got a Sky Sports subscription, or you've got a big television, but you're not feeding your children properly? But I mean, all of that sort of stuff goes back, decades and decades. Road to Wigan Pier has bits about, they could just live on lentils and have money left over from their unemployment benefit. That this kind of deserving and undeserving, as you say, goes back to Pygmalion. It's a story as old as time. Angela Constant is just the motion of no confidence has just started at the point where we are recording. This, I suppose, is the kind of biggest story at Holyrood this week, and the vote of no confidence in Angela Constance as Justice Minister after the comments that she made in the chamber relating to the need, or rather the lack of requirement to have an inquiry in Scotland into so-called grooming gangs.
Yeah, and I mean, having listened to various people talking about it, the thing that really seems to irk everyone, because it looks like the Greens have decided she's going to stay, so they've got the votes. If they pitch up, this vote of no confidence will not succeed. But I noticed, last night, I was watching Scotland Tonight, again, excellent programme to digest and get into this stuff. And Paul Sinclair, who used to be a Labour spin doctor, was saying, the thing that's just really irritating about all of this, and actually everybody agreed, was that she hasn't apologised.
Yes.
And the thing is, that might sound like, God damn it, in the great scheme of things, really, that's the big deal, is it? But, if you're going to have protocols of any kind in a parliament, I mean, one of them is that you don't mislead the House, and Paul was recalling a time that Alex Salmond had given some statistics that just he didn't realise were wrong.
College stats.
Right. And he belted back in when he realised they were wrong. He belted back in at 5:00 and apologised to the House.
Yeah, and that was it.
Yes. And as with everything, if this isn't an inadvertent thing, then just going in and actually apologising is kind of pretty important. And given that Angela hasn't, apparently, I mean, she may be doing this now, but that seems to have irked people enough that they've just thought, right, that's it. There's been enough disappointments in the sector that she's in charge of. And clearly there's a bit of political axe grinding. And of course, there's the English example of not wanting to have a national review about child sexual exploitation going on in England. That was not going to happen. Labour didn't think it was necessary. And people will have spotted that eventually there was so much of a pushback on that they caved in, set up a review that they've had a hell of a problem with, because a lot of the folk involved with it, the lasses, have basically said they've got no confidence in the person who's leading it, or Jess Phillips, the minister, who spent much of her life actually campaigning on this kind of issue. So it is a difficult one, but this is not a good way to start off with, because this question of trust is so absolutely key with people who have, when we were talking about trauma earlier, this, the experience of being groomed as a 14, 13-year-old girl and raped by men over and over again. Yeah. That's a different leg thing.
Yeah. It's all of these child exploitation and survivors of child sexual abuse matters are hugely, hugely complicated, very difficult, all fraught with the emotion and the dignity and the standing of the survivors. And having inquiries and these sorts of things can often go badly wrong because the survivors don't feel heard, and that the end product doesn't bring them any closer to a resolution to their own trauma and to the crimes that have been perpetrated against them. It does seem odd that she didn't just kind of go in and correct the record, because obviously this Professor Jay wrote to the Scottish Government saying that she felt that she'd been quoted out of context. She had said that she didn't feel that there was a need for another inquiry in England, but there haven't been any inquiries in Scotland into this type of the race element of grooming gangs. There obviously have been inquiries into child sexual exploitation within kind of statutory settings and school settings and care homes and other kind of foster placements and what have you, but not this kind of community-based grooming, and the race element of it has not been investigated. And I think I'm right in saying that she had basically called on the Scottish Government to actually do a review of what evidence there might have been in Scotland, which there doesn't seem to be much. And having announced that they were not doing anything and misquoting this expert, and then announced that they were going to do something, Andrew Learmonth in the Herald kind of reports that actually none of the big groupings, Education Inspectorate, Healthcare Scotland, or any of these, Police Scotland, actually have really been told to do anything yet, or given any terms of reference, or set any kind of tasks 2 weeks down the line. When you've got the Justice Secretary's position on the line, it does seem very slow moving. And
it's funny how that
kind of statement they sort of bung out just to kind of get you through the news cycle, but don't actually follow up with any action on the back of.
But it's funny how that sort of echoes the earlier discussion about, these girls and boys, I'm guessing, have been through enough that when they get a promise from somebody that they are, they're going to be heard and this is going to mean something, and they're not old like us, they haven't been through this a million times already, they actually dare to hope, to believe in somebody. And it's it's the belief going that and you're made to look like a fool. All of that just reopens the whole thing and makes people so angry. And these lasses particularly are not scared of just speaking out. And of course, they have got the attention of the media now. So that's who's listening to them. and you've just got to take this on board. So I don't know, I'm sure Angela Constance will come out the other end of this. But with all of this, an awful lot more humility probably stands you in very good stead. And just as you say, in every respect, there is no point in putting out just the holding stuff and the promise and the empty words and everything. It's actually just maddens people.
Yeah. And a kind of talking normally, I saw a couple of news clips where she'd been doorstepped, obviously going into the chamber and things like that. And it was very kind of formulaic government speak, which tells you quite early on that actually there's no really an answer behind this. If you're having to kind of sort of dissemble in that kind of weird sort of government press release type rhetoric, rather than actually just being able to kind of speak more naturally.
Yeah, but who can? I mean, really, who does speak in any sort of semi-natural way? Unfortunately, it's West bloody streeting, but yeah. And that's also, where the Greens leader comes in, because he's also very good at just speaking normally. But then that probably comes from him not being a member of Parliament. So he hasn't been boxed and coxed yet. Yes. But I think we should talk about what happened in Australia, because
it's just been a shocking terrorist event just over the last days, with this father and son group attacking people on the beach at Bondi who were there to celebrate the lighting of the menorah, and just a shocking loss of life, and some incredible heroism of people that were nearby.
Yes, particularly that the Muslim guy actually who apparently took about 5 bullets in the end. It turned out nobody quite realised that at the time, but I mean, it is just utterly horrible. And there was actually a very good message put round by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign here pretty much immediately, because you could see what was the equivalence that was going to start being drawn, which of course Netanyahu did, and said that the reason it had happened in Australia was because Australia had recognised the state of Palestine. And so, I mean, there was lots of debate about that last night, and kind of clearly the Australian Prime Minister was saying, well, actually, most of the world recognises a two-state solution, and just by the by, so did Israel until you came along. So it's kind of, that's probably not it. But there's obviously it's the aspect of this that cannot be spoken, because clearly Israel's actions in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of people, has that changed anything? Because actually, it looks as if for these guys, who knows what their motives were, they had form. Looks like they went to the Philippines a month before this happened. So yeah, there was also a very, very good kind of rabbi on, who I think was a Scottish rabbi, who was making the point. He was bemoaning the fact that at that point, this was maybe just a day or two ago, the BBC was not describing what happened as terrorism. And he was saying, he was challenging the interviewer. Actually, it was Good Morning Scotland. I'm never going to get with it. And she kind of said, "Oh, but we've got our guidelines and everything." Right, there you are. And he'd said, right, the same. It looks like the same kind of sect, if you like, support for was behind these two, as was behind the Manchester shootings and so on. And that was immediately called terrorism. And so I think that's fair enough. This does seem to me to be an act of terrorism. And then just quite separately, I think Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And this is kind of, these are two separate things. You can't go around. I think the Solidarity Campaign were saying that you can't hold Jews responsible for the actions of Israel any more than Muslims can be held responsible for the actions of Al-Qaeda. So, that's right.
Which is not at all helped by people like Netanyahu actually making that equivalence and drawing Judaism into the actions of the state of Israel.
And sort of weaponizing the whole thing, because I'm sure that the kind of hurt that there is to the country, really, and to the Jewish community everywhere, but particularly Australia, of seeing all this thing happen, that is pretty massive. And then to kind of turn the heat up on it like that, to kind of politically weaponize it and try to use it to try to kind of get the political opposition off your back, and of course we know there's a so-called ceasefire going on that isn't much of a ceasefire at all, and however it has taken the eyes of the world off what's going on in Gaza. It is terrible, but this was, and again, there was a complaint that for a long time it was just a mention that there were people killed in Australia, and it was Jewish people. I think perhaps there was maybe one passerby. But, we should be able to just say what's happening, extend human sympathy to appalling situations, and hold our own political beliefs up, because it's quite possible many people there, in a wider sense, also are disowning what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza. These are two separate things.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree with that. And bringing them together in that way just makes the tragedy of it all so much worse. You talked about the ceasefire that isn't. Obviously, there's been some further moves in the peace talks in Ukraine, but the EU kind of getting tough on Belgium to stop blocking the use of the Russian money that's currently being held due to the sanctions.
Yes, and I should say that I had a lovely lunch yesterday with an old pal of mine, Jean Urquhart, and Jen Stout, who has just come in from Kyiv. Jen, obviously, her book portrays her whole experience of being a reporter within that war zone. And it's so difficult for people who are in the frontline situation of those frontline countries and are sort of getting the kind of almost infinite weariness of everybody who's on the back row, and that's us. So, when people say something like, well, Putin is getting so gung-ho he might invade Europe, stand well back. That's Ukraine is Europe. All the countries along that long border, including Finland, I'm very conscious of them having just completed the film about it, but they're all basically looking down the barrel of war. And it's difficult because, of course, anyone who's a bit pacifist and a bit, not warmongering here wants to walk in the other direction, but by gum. Anyway, we've talked before about the idea of giving money to Ukraine. Actually, it's a loan, but you'd have to imagine it'd be a pretty blooming long-term repayment loan. 210 billion quid could be given to Ukraine by using the frozen assets of Russia, which sit mostly in the Euroclear Bank in Brussels. And that looks kind of cool because it means everybody doesn't have to knacker their own countries by dipping into the cash they don't have to try and come up with money for Ukraine. And it would have to be said, as I understand it, that loan would obviously be for weapons, but also for reconstruction and for just keeping the state going, at a normal level. So that's what that could be. And there's been weeks of trying to persuade the Belgian government to just agree. And most of the EU had been on side for it. The Italians have kind of come out with the Belgians going, I don't think so, because the Belgians are worried that they'll get whacked by Russia should everything go the wrong way. So today, there's all sorts of efforts being made to kind of come up with a different way round. So, for example, getting every EU country to back the loan so that there would be billions ready to be paid if there was any problem with using those Russian reserves, so the Belgians wouldn't be kind of hung out to dry. There's various other mechanisms being proposed to desperately try to pull together this money. And at the same time, then there's Trump's comments where he was talking about how useless basically European politicians were and the civilizational decline of Europe. And you would have to say that it kind of when you're faced with a problem like this, and that's been, how's it, 4 years of Ukraine now, 4 years, and we're still having the same EU countries that are kind of decrying Russia are also still actually trading and can't manage to get this sort of deal together to support Ukraine. It feels very, if when you speak to somebody who's been so recently in that zone, this just looks poor.
Yes, and as you say, the Belgians seem to be concerned that, if there's ever any peace in the future and sanctions are lifted, that they're going to somehow be individually hit for repaying this money, plus the kind of interest on it that would have been generated if the assets hadn't been frozen. But, this is a very live situation just now, and humming and hawing seems to be what Trump is getting to. There's a lot of prevarication and not very much actual leadership. Although it'd be fair to say that there's a fairly sizable proportion of Scottish independent supporters who take a much more pro-Russia view and a kind of anti-Zelensky view, certainly, on these issues as well. So there's nothing straightforward
Really?
here. Oh, goodness, yes.
God, I must have missed them. That.
There's a very big section of Russian support within the kind of top. Yes, there's a lot. It's obviously very hard to say anything with any degree of certainty when you're looking at X or Twitter because of the amount of kind of fake people and what have you that are now there doing the bidding of different foreign governments. So it's been a bit of a bourach. But as you say, you wrote in the National recently about Trump's decrying of Europe and its mucking around. Elon Musk is not very happy either because he's possibly going to be sanctioned, but it seems to be that they just don't actually like to come up against something on the rules-based order the way that the EU operates, and that you are going to get fined if your platform spreads misinformation, regardless of whether you decide to label that misinformation as free speech or not.
Yeah. And actually, when you looked at it, I mean, there's quite a lot of, they're nearly all former politicians. It's amazing how the brain is freed by not hodding the position that you hod anymore. But there's one guy, Josep Borrell, who's a Spaniard. He was vice president of the European Commission. And he was warning that what the US is looking for is the breakup of the EU. It's got to be said, a lot of people feel that's what Russia wants in Ukraine is civil war. So you'll get, the deals that are happening in Ukraine. He's hoping you'll get the people who feel that they're safe in the middle of Ukraine going about the oblasts that Russia wants to take, which they don't fully occupy at the moment. The idea is that Putin's hoping that the sort of safe Ukrainians will go, yeah, just take them, look, anything to stop the war. Then that won't be acceptable. And then they'll have a civil war. And that will be big Jim Dandy, because that's probably exactly what Putin's aiming for. The same thinking from Josep Borrell about what the Americans want in Europe, which is to break up the EU as a union. He says they're promoting, the Americans are promoting ideologically aligned parties within a white Europe that would be subordinated to American demands. And he wants everyone to stop pretending President Trump is not our adversary. So there's a lot going on. And actually, I was reading a really fascinating thing in Politicos that was looking, which I can't sum it up quickly enough, but was looking at polling that suggests that actually, however, precisely the opposite view is held by young Europeans. They're actually, in much the same way as there is polling evidence that suggests that that independents and the SNP, and you'd have to say in Wales, Plaid, is being boosted by the presence of reform, because people are beginning to go, geez, if that's the size of it, that we're going to have Nigel Farage in Downing Street, let's get out of here. So it's acting as a pretty good sort of prompt, to kind of take the next step. This polling in Europe is suggesting young Europeans are saying, let's have a United States of Europe then. Let's just, if this is right, and there's all sorts of shilly-shallying, and, there's nationalism within the EU is getting in the way of common cause, let's have a United States of Europe. They're becoming real Euro-federalists. Now, they're young. That may mean nothing. They might not turn out to vote. There's been a wee change in the rules in the EU such that parties can be created which straddle countries, which previously they couldn't. So the cause of becoming more intensively European can now have a party that straddles, that stands in every country at the next election. So who knows? Because one thing we do know is that there's a lot of, every action creates a reaction. And the action of Trump telling us that Europe's crap and actually some evidence that, our leadership is a bit crap, has actually created quite a bullish response amongst younger people, which might yet change the dial. Fact ends.
It's very interesting to see, and you're not going to get that with a UK government that's just desperate to appease Trump and maintain as close a link as possible with the US, regardless of what it's actually up to. I keep thinking every now and again, surely the Trump presidency must be kind of more than halfway through. There is now a countdown timer where we're not even at the 1,000-day mark.
Terrible.
To go. So it's quite. You think either whether he actually lasts to the end of it or not, with all his bruised back of his hands and what have you, and all the different stories that are doing the rounds about his health, is one to watch as well. But yeah, we've still got a long way to go, and it doesn't look like the sort of mindset of the US is going to change anytime soon.
Except, I mean, colour me Pollyanna, I'll take that. But they've got midterm elections next year. Yeah. Apparently, there is, I think I mentioned it last week, only a third of US adults back Trump's handling of the economy. So it's very much like Starmer. We seek him here, we seek him there. And, fair play, if he gets any of this stuff over the line with Ukraine, that's good. But, most people will still judge you on what you've actually done here, in domestic politics. And it just looks as if with inflation on the rise in the States, that is going to be tough. And all the stuff, that just doesn't quite make the news because it's so full of all the bluster and the horror and so on. You miss things like, Trump has had a $12 billion bailout for farmers hit by his trade war with China. Yeah. So that's tariffs not working in normal speak. And there's plenty more where that comes from. So, who knows, this could all sort of disintegrate a bit over the next year.
Well, that's the kind of similar optimism, although not on the EU front. I think you would like us to point out that Jim Sillars has, and he's got a new book out shortly, The Case for Optimism. And he seems to be quite bullish that actually we've never really been at a better time, and the potential of a kind of Farageist government in Downing Street will open up big opportunities for the 2029 UK general election for a kind of extra push towards independence.
Yeah, it was a column that Kevin McKenna wrote in the Herald. You'd have to say Kevin has got his own particular eccentric-ish, perhaps carnaptious. I'm sure he wouldn't object to that description, sort of attitude of things now. So he, for example, what is he calling he's calling the SNP leadership cockroaches. So that will tell you something about where Kevin's coming from these days. But Jim's book, which is really the new case for optimism, is trying to look at, he thinks 28, 29, the general election is kind of the last chance for Scottish independence for really some time. Obviously, he's noticing the pillars of the British state that are falling to pieces. We talked about the BBC, internal crises hollowing out the Church of England. Not that I think that probably affects many people north of the border. The royal family. I mean, that's been happening for some time. And it's one part of the equation is the falling to pieces of Britishness. The other thing it still strikes me is the confidence that you can actually move forward with Scottishness, if you like. It's the other side of the equation. It doesn't just automatically kick in, which is why I still think it's kind of muscle memory that Scots need. It's having control of something and then realizing you did it, nobody died, and actually you could take on a lot more. But anyway, that's by the by. So yes, he's really thinking that there needs to be a lot of change within the SNP. Still thinks that somehow stuff can be changed around within the SNP for it to become a more sort of responsive party, and thinks that the Scottish elections will do something of that ilk, because it will not produce a good enough result for the SNP to let them continue as they are. I don't know.
I think the big fear of the 2026 election is that it actually produces a kind of slightly meh response, and the Conservative opposition at Holyrood gets replaced by a kind of less coherent Reform opposition that also looks a bit more like a bogeyman in the way that the Tories should do but don't. And that, you can have a couple of years of just kind of, yeah, boo, sucks to you, and, aren't reform ghastly, but with an SNP group and an SNP result that's kind of neither big nor small, and doesn't actually generate any kind of internal rethinking or realignment within the party would be a big concern.
Yeah, although, I mean, the last poll I saw was looking at 17% for the Greens on the list, which would, I think, the total between, not that, of course, that's how John Swinney's judging anything,
No.
which is still very annoying, really. But still, the combination of those two would be a whopping great independence majority. But if that's not how you've calibrated it before the gig, you can't claim it, However, once the gig goes on, you still do have that independence majority if you're going to do anything with it. When I've read properly what Jim is saying, Jim Sillars, he says he's moved around the country the last 2 years. He thinks a movement must seize power from the SNP. And he says, I'm not suggesting a new party in the normal sense. He wants agreed candidates to stand in every constituency. It could include some from the SNP under this movement title, if they've joined by then. If the SNP continues to assert it is the one and only party for independence, having had its chance and failed, then it should step aside. And if not, it will find itself irrelevant on the ballot paper. I see that's not going to happen, is it?
I don't think it's going to happen. Whether it should happen or might happen is something that's worthwhile exploring. You could potentially see after 2026 a kind of upsurge and then explosion of your party, along with a kind of final petering out of those yesers that are very embedded within the SNP, and then that kind of restlessness that's been evident for a long time, since maybe the 2017 UK general election, when Yes supporters deserted the SNP to try and put forward a message. I don't think we'll have that in a type of message being put forward in 2026, because there's kind of enough indie chat potentially around with the SNP that they will certainly potentially secure the constituency vote, or perhaps with a kind of cohort of begrudging voters. What happens on the list is very up in the air. And whether that actually leads to any kind of soul searching, either by the party or by a big enough movement of other people in the kind of what's left of the independence campaign, remains to be seen. It's very difficult, as we know, to bring any of these strands together. And it's very hard, I think, for individual people to know what the right thing to do is. There's lots of angst across the independence movement, and there's certainly plenty of angst within the SNP, and I see some councillor in Argyll and Bute resigning today. But where that energy should be directed to is very unclear, and I think that leaves people with a kind of very unsettled feeling of just listlessness and not really knowing where to go to.
Yeah, because, I mean, I think Jim and various other folk had a meeting in Glasgow. I didn't hear much about the outcome of it. And this is part of the problem again, because you've got a mountain to climb in terms of trying to get any profile for something. And of course, now, whether it's right or wrong, Alaba sits in people's minds as a kind of example of something that tried to do something, had all sorts of difficulties, and is now not sitting with anything like the support that should be reflected by the effort that went into it, and quite a lot of internal problems. But hey, every party's got them. It's just, you look at it, it is so visible when you're a small, new, aspiring party. That does seem difficult. To be fair to Jim, he's not advocating for a new party, but to try and get a movement that's going to agree candidates in every constituency who are, the folk that people would say, aye, these guys are going to give it laldy and they really will be chasing independence. That's not a party. That's quite difficult. I mean, I'm not saying this is a bad idea. It's just just as you say, everything except the SNP moving up a gear is difficult.
Yeah. Well, the new case for optimism is out now on Vagabond Voices, and we'll put the link up to that. And I'm sure it'll be a very interesting read in the way that Jim's previous two books, No Fear and In Place of Failure, have been. And look to hear more about that in the new year. I certainly think in the lead up to the election as well, it's difficult to pull people off, because there's a lot of kind of one more heavers thinking that actually now is not the time to be disruptive and to kind of present any kind of internal warfare within the independence movement ahead of the 2026 election is really the wrong thing to do. But I think it's extremely important to be having these kind of conversations and thoughts about what might come after that election now, rather than waiting till the event is actually had.
Yeah. And I know we're sort of running out of time, but Trump and the BBC, lordy.
$5 billion. I mean, like something. Dr. Evil. Where he gets these amounts from. I mean, he now does seem to be taking legal action against the BBC rather than just threatening it. But, you got to be careful what you wish for, like Oscar Wilde taking people to court for defamation when you are actually a bad one. I'm not saying Oscar Wilde was a bad one, but, when there are things to be disproven against you. Who was the other guy with the sword of truth and the shield of British justice, a perjurer? You got to be a bit careful. I don't think his reputation has been dented 5 cents, never mind $5 billion. And whether you're actually able to take that to court and make it stand up in a defamation case remains to be seen, frankly. I think this is the big shakedown.
But that's why the interesting thing is the BBC then in this, because if they decide that, I think we may have talked about this before, when I think it was Joshua Rosenberg, when the first, when Trump first rumbled on this front, who is he's a very respected legal correspondent, Joshua Rosenberg, sort of said that he would expect the BBC to be talking to the Trump lawyers, trying to discuss wording, attraction, and what level of compensation would satisfy the president. No, because that's millions of quid that's coming from us, the license fee payers. And of course, there's a green paper out just today looking at future funding for the BBC, which we'll just have to wait till another time. But there's been plenty of discussion about this from people with, a bit more go about them. I mean, Andrew Marr even was on Channel 4 and saying that if the BBC folds, it'll be terrible because the Beeb's under attack from Moscow over Ukraine, from the Israeli government. This would affect Britain's reputation, never mind the BBC. Okay, you might not care about that so much. But there was an excellent guy, CNN's chief media analyst, Brian Stelter, and he put this really starkly. He says, do you fight? Do you fold? We've seen this in the US media, Harvard University, others, law firms. The ones who fight end up winning. The ones who fold to Trump, like Paramount, which is the parent company of CBS, endure reputational harm. And if you look at Disney, which suspended Jimmy Kimmel in September, they had a huge consumer backlash with people cancelling subscriptions. So he's saying the BBC board must think about the backlash if they appear to capitulate to a US president who, in Britain, is widely despised. Quite. So, I really hope this is not the beginning of the Beeb just, running around trying to come up with a couple of million quid. They'll stick it behind some legal mechanism that means that none of us can actually see what's going on. But really, the timing of this is you cannot, with all the trouble that the Beeb is having with viewers drifting away to YouTube, Netflix, others, and still you've got the license fee for which is a criminal offence not to have a license, and it's not something that's recognised income levels, and there's discussions about instead having some sort of payment that would be allied to council tax so that there would be something a little bit progressive about it. I mean, all of this is in the mix, and that's everyone kind of going, right, even if you're not a Scottish nationalist and have your issues with the Beeb, you're still wondering. And at this point, you come out and give squillions to Donald Trump, for a programme that was never even broadcast. in America? You need to have a VPN to have watched it. Come on.
Also, I mean, this, as we know, is Trump's MO. That's how he dealt with people in business. He signed up contracts, come and build me a hotel or paint the inside of this lobby or do whatever. And they agree a price, and then he would just refuse to pay it. And he would come up with a different price and just rely on the fact that the contractors were too small to have the kind of financial backing to call his bluff on it and take him to court, because he had more lawyers than they did and could just string it out as long as possible till you went bankrupt. So you had to just take the haircut and end up making a loss on the job that you thought you'd got for Trump Towers or whatever, and just suck it up. Whereas the ones that were big enough to go, no, there is a contract. You said you're going to pay X. You haven't. We'll come and rip it out if you don't get your money across. Won. So be careful what you wish for. And I don't think anybody, regardless of their standing for the BBC, would be expecting effectively taxpayers' money to be going on and supporting Trump in that kind of financial way. And no amount of token gesture is going to be enough. It's less than 5 billion, then it's not what it's looking for. You're not going to negotiate that down to less than tens of millions. And who's paying that, frankly?
Yeah, we're not. I can quite see this becoming really quite a big deal if they try to go ahead with this. But anyway, we'll see. The days will rumble on through this.
Angela Constance has won the vote of no confidence.
Quelle surprise.
The result was 67 to 57 with one abstention. She's certainly not gone as a result of the vote of no confidence, but I think this will obviously undermine her standing as Cabinet Secretary for Justice. Whether there can be a sort of reset on that over the Christmas period remains to be seen. She can kind of come back all guns blaring in the new year, but I'm sure she'll take a moment of gratitude to have survived the vote.
And I should just say the outdoor education bill finally its final reading this afternoon. This is the one that gives every school kid a week in an outdoor education centre that has now got the backing of all the political parties, and the SNP have sort of said they would fund it. So I really hope that goes ahead, because boy, do we need to turn the tide on all that stuff. And can I just say thank you for the 3 people who've made donations for the wee film about the groovy forest in the north of Sutherland. I mean, really, that was great. And we just need a couple of more 50 quids and we're there. This thing will get edited. And Europe's only Ogham alphabet forest, which was devised by a community who are the descendants of people cleared by the Duke of Sutherland in Strathnaver, which I'll tell you is my grudge match part of this. That wee film will find its way onto YouTube. Meanwhile, Finland is ready. Glory be. God, this has been like a sort of 2-year pregnancy, this one. And so we've sent the link out to the folk the 228 people, thank you so much, who made donations to the crowdfunder for that. I'm trying to put together the cinemas. They tend to not be so keen on giving something a run if it's already on YouTube. So that's why I'm, doing everything at the same time, but just trying to get a few dates agreed before everything stops for the festive break. And there will be community things around that. But I know people are getting in touch, and it's just to try and say to you, it's great to see that everyone's so keen. But if I, for example, went, yeah, fine, let me go to Carnoustie on, February the 19th, and then February the 20th is the only day that, Eden Court can do it in Inverness. And then the logical thing would be to have a couple more of the community things around Inverness. So I'm not going up and down the A9 like a blooming boomerang. That'll be a problem, So I'm trying to get blocks of stuff sorted first. So it's fine if people get in touch, but please it's only me doing this as usual. And I'm just trying to kind of get the big rocks in first, but this will get sorted soon.
Jolly good, but people can still get in touch through hello@leslieriddoch.com on either the donations for editing or if you're looking for a showing, once you have properly thought about it and thought about whether you can chum up with some other local group to make a bigger event.
Yes.
And on that note, I think...
Oh, no, and just a slight note. Are we coming back next week?
Well, I was just about to say, next week will be the 23rd of December. There'll probably be nothing happening between now and then, apart from the fact everything will have happened between now and then. I think we might be off now until January, but if one pops up in your RSS feed, you'll just be extra double lucky. But if not, then I think we wish everybody a good new year, and we'll see them in January for the review of the year and the beginning of the short campaign for the Holyrood election.
Right.
Excitement unbounded.
It is like
everybody in their living room going, "Oh, can't wait."
Well, I mean, I'm quite happy to see that I've got the 23rd to myself. Actually, I didn't realise till this very minute. So, that's nice to get a couple of weeks to not have to try and think.
Yes.
Jolly good. Well, on that note, we'll see you in the new year, folks, and take care and have a good Hogmanay.
Yeah, have a great time.